Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Malu if you don't know me. Gunther is trying to get in the video and he's making a lot of sounds, so I'm just gonna have him lay here while we do this because he purrs really loud. I have not filmed a book video in a very long time. I used to post them very regularly, I feel like. I got extremely busy and I wasn't able to read as much as I wanted to. Now I'm ready to talk about some of the books that I've been reading. Some of them are going to be physical books that I've read. Some of them I've listened to. I have realized that whenever I have those periods of time in my life where I am very busy, that I can continue reading. I just have to do an audiobook. That is my tip for you. If you're busy, get onto that audiobook grind. It has really helped me get back into reading more consistently and get me more excited about reading, because I know that even if I don't have time, I can still sprinkle a little bit of the book I'm currently reading or listening to throughout my day. Before we get started though, I want to show you my reading journal from Papier. It's really nice. It has pages for your reading. You put the title, you give it a review, you put like where you got this book from. All of the things that we're gonna go through in this video to make the reviews a little bit more organized are due to the layout of this reading journal, and I really like that. It helps me kind of visualize the book better. Sometimes it's hard to kind of recall things, and this consists of some reflection questions that help me understand better how I feel about the book I read. The first book that I read this year is called Poesia Canhestra by Malu, who is a friend of mine. This book is fully in Portuguese, so I'm sorry if you don't speak Portuguese, you're not able to read it yet. This is a poetry collection that I read, obviously a physical copy of. I gave this book an 8 out of 10, and this is a poetry collection that talks about a lot of different emotions. It talks about relationships, friendship, it talks about admiring your friends and the relationship you have with them. It talks a lot about the feeling of being an immigrant as well. Different things. It's a collection of poems of different instances and emotions. And I would definitely read this book again, and I would also recommend this book. First impression of the book was that I loved the tone of the book. It was very thoughtful and empathetic, and it felt very wholesome. And then my final thoughts after I read it was that I really enjoyed the writing style and the topics that were written about in this book, as well as the tone of the writing again. It was short and pleasant, and it felt cozy. My key takeaways. So this is the kind of poetry book that I enjoy a lot, because it notices the mundane things in life. It's simple enough so that even non-poetry enjoyers would be able to read it and understand it, and it makes you feel welcomed by the poetry because it is written in a way that is conversational and engaging so that you can understand it while you're reading it and feel the impact of it. But it also personally made me feel welcomed in a way that I felt like, hey, I can do this too, because when I was reading their writing, I realized that I also write in a very similar tone. And we have slightly similar writing styles, so that made me have a sort of sense of relatability as well when reading this poetry. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. The next book that I read this year is Great Big Beautiful Life by Emily Henry. This is a fiction contemporary romance book, and I obviously read it in physical format. I waited a little bit to read this one after the release. I don't like that usually Emily Henry releases come out with hardcover books first. I hate reading hardcover books. No offense if you like it, but I like to bend my book back and forth, and it's way more comfortable for me to read a book if it's paperback. I gave this book 2 out of 5 stars. I've realized that over time, I don't feel connected to her writing anymore. It could be that her writing has changed, or that I am no longer the audience for it because I've grown and changed as well ever since starting to read her books. I do still like Beach Read as my favorite of her books. This book is about 2 writers who compete for a chance to write a famous actress's biography, but there is romance and a plot twist that occurs. I picked up this book because when I read the blurb, I did really enjoy the fact that it was based on journalism. I think it's interesting when characters have a very specific job that they do, because I think that it's fun to read about different jobs that a character does and how that also affects how they act or their personality. But I just found that that was the only main thing that I enjoyed about the book. My first impressions of the book was that I was very excited for another Emily Henry book, because I like the setting of the small remote town and the journalists as main characters. My final thoughts were not very good. Great biography story, and I did like the back and forth of the journalism and the secrecy and hesitation of the actress as she was having these journalists write about her life. So I thought that was really interesting to see in the character and how the character acted because of her position. However, the romance was not fun or intriguing to read about. I thought that the characters felt flat and I did not care about them. The love interest barely had a personality except for the fact that he liked to sit in corners at coffee shops and he cared a lot about his health. I put, what else? Romance had no significant slow burn or small hints to lead up to it, and I enjoy when there's little hints that you can see that the romance is blossoming. I felt like it moved a little bit too fast and it just felt very lustful and almost smut writing, and that's just not something that I personally enjoy reading because I don't find it interesting to read about. And then I put that the main character wasn't very likable as a person, and her family issues I didn't care much for. The relationship with her mom could have been better written through adding more context or more content from her memories and flashbacks that would make us readers understand why she had a bad relationship with her mom. And I just feel like it could have been done better, where we could have gotten little hints or build up towards why that relationship was. I feel like a lot of it was like a little bit too straightforward, and that conflict got resolved in a way which made sense, but it wasn't satisfying again, or felt like there was enough explanation for that conflict to kind of back up the conflict. And I think that only seeing things from the main character's point of view sometimes makes the story lacking. So adding input from other characters to mention useful information would have helped. The next book I read is Down the Drain by Julia Fox. I gave this a 4 out of 5. This is a nonfiction memoir, and I also read this one in January. This is about Julia Fox's life growing up in New York City as an Italian in a rocky family situation and how that affected her behavior, her experience. It talks about her experience with drug and substance abuse, her sex work experience, and turbulent love life. I would not lightly recommend this book to anyone because this book is very graphic in many different ways. It talks about heavy subjects, so I would recommend that if you do want to read this book, that you look up trigger warnings for it so that you feel comfortable before you're reading and you know what you're going into. Julia Fox has had a really crazy life, and despite the fact that her writing is very good and it is very interesting, it is shocking in many ways. And if you're not in a good mental state or you have trauma from certain things, it might not be a good thing for you to read. So first impressions of the book was shocking, but then the book hooked you. And then final thoughts was great writing, engaging book that makes you want to keep reading. Overall, I just think the writing was really good. She wrote in a way that made you want to keep reading and made you stay interested in what she was talking about. And then my key takeaways from the book were that the book was still shocking, but it made me respect her and her boldness way more. You gain a kind of understanding when you read somebody's story instead of only seeing how the media portrays them, and it humanizes them a lot. Again, I had only seen her through how the public saw her, through how the media saw her, through all the shocking things that she has done, and through like her outfits and her fashion and how that is viewed. After reading everything that she's been through and the things that led to the things that she went through and suffered through, and to see that she has still, you know, come back out on the other side and has a career for herself. And it kind of just makes me think about how that happens a lot with people online, how they're perceived a certain way. And unfortunately, sometimes it takes them oversharing something for them to gain some respect from people, which that shouldn't need to be a thing. But unfortunately, I guess the more you get to know about people, it affects how you view them. The next book I read in 2026 is Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. I listened to this one, and this is a fictional classic. I also read this one in January. I was on a roll. In January, I was reading. I gave this book a 2.5 out of 5 stars. It's a period piece, so you can kind of envision that. But Jane Eyre is about a young woman who is rejected by her family. She has a bad relationship with them and they end up kicking her out. And then she finds work as a governess in this big home. And she develops a sort of rocky relationship with her boss, I'm gonna say, in a sort of turbulent kind of romance that is confusing at first, whether there's even any romance there. There's a lot of yearning. Then there's also something in the story that I don't want to spoil, about a previous relationship that the boss has had. A plot twist that maybe you wouldn't expect. I would not read this book again, but I would recommend depending on your taste. First impressions of the book, when I first started listening to it, was that I really enjoyed the beginning. It was interesting and it was fast-paced in introducing the story. It did a great job in getting me interested in the character. Final thoughts after reading it is that it is all right. It's an interesting story, and it's more than a usual period piece usually offers. I think that after reading this book, it would have benefited from being more concise and faster paced, although I know that wasn't the point. I'm just saying for me to enjoy it. I didn't enjoy the pensiveness and depressive and self-deprecation aspect of the main character. And I put, girl, we get it. Because I think that I understood the gloomy aspect of the book, but it gets to a point where like it's too slow and it's just too depressive and too gloomy, and I'm not really enjoying it anymore. I cared a little bit more about the boss's story, especially towards the end. Like, you get a lot from him, and I thought that that was a really interesting part of the story, but just following it through the main character's point of view just was slow and not very interesting a lot of the time. So yeah, I think it was just too gloomy and slow paced for me, but if you like that, you might enjoy it. Next one is Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. It is a fiction classic. Some people call it romance. I would not call it romance. I feel like by now a lot of people have watched the film, unfortunately, so I don't even know if this will do the story any justice. However, so the book is centered around two main characters at first, and then the second generation, you could say, of them later on. So when we first start the book, it centers around this girl and this boy who have come together because the girl's dad has brought this kid who was rejected, was just in the streets, I believe, brought him into their home, and the girl became fond of him. They became obsessed with each other and started having a rocky relationship. It also talks a lot about the racial implications of that, I guess, because he is dark-skinned, and during that time, obviously, racism was worse. There's a whole thing about that and how she's seen because of that and how he's seen because of that, but nonetheless, they love each other. At first, I would say maybe they love each other, and then over time, they just have a very toxic relationship, which is very controlling, very obsessive. And then we go to see how that affects her daughter later on, as well as Heathcliff, who is the man's relatives. I would say this is a book that just talks about relationships, how there's a thin line between romance, love, and obsession in a way that is extremely toxic and aggressive. But I will say that reading the book was very interesting. I think that despite the fact that there's a lot going on, the book was written in a way that to me was a little bit funny. When I was reading the story about the first generation of these people and their romance, the main character, Catherine, is very dramatic, very controlling, very self-centered, and I think that the way the book was written and the things that she will say to people to bring attention onto herself and to victimize herself were funny, because of how absurd they were. I would not read this book again, and I would not personally recommend this book unless you're like really into literature and you like period pieces and you like classics. But I think that if you did watch the movie, then I feel like it's really mean saying this, but the movie really did do a disservice to the book. I think that if you watch the movie and you have an opinion about it, it would be great for you to read the book and kind of compare the two and see how you feel, because the movie really narrowed the story down to lust a lot of the time and like a rocky romance when that wasn't really the point of the story. So first impressions for me were that the book was engaging, it was interesting, and I wanted to keep reading to kind of see like how crazy these people were. Final thoughts, it was okay. Like I feel like it got to a point where things just kept happening and it kept going and it kept going, and it was just like, I don't care anymore. After reading Wuthering Heights and before reading this next book, I read a Dr. Seuss book, which I obviously like didn't write a review for, but I just wanted to mention it because it's a children's classic poetry book. And if you've seen my film Roommates, which will be online eventually after a festival run, very much inspired by Cat in the Hat vibes through all the color, because when I was younger, wish I could live in a world that was colorful like that and like felt like bubblegum and cotton candy, and I still do. And I have more projects that I would like to make which have a similar vibe and aesthetic. I wanted to buy a Dr. Seuss book so that I could look at the drawing style and the way that the pages are positioned and things like that. If you have children, just read them a little goofy, silly thing. To finalize this book video, we have The Housemaid by Frida McFadden. This is a contemporary fiction slash mystery slash thriller. I would say best way to describe it is both contemporary fiction as well as thriller. I read this first one back in March. I also listened to it on Hoopla because I was busy. I had to drive around, therefore we were listening, not reading. Housemaid is about a housemaid who starts working for a rich family. She has a prison record, so when she finds out that she finally got hired for this job, because she has been trying to get jobs throughout her parole, I believe, and she struggles due to her criminal record getting hired and things like that. So when she gets hired to work for this rich family as a housemaid, she's pretty surprised because she's like, oh, they don't care that I have a prison record? Maybe they didn't check. Maybe they're just a little silly, didn't do a background check. She later finds out that the home is quite a bit dysfunctional, to say the very least. That's why she got hired. And she initially just thinks that her boss who hired her name is Nina, rich lady, very crazy, like stir crazy, I guess could be the word. She eventually finds out why that character acts that way, the truth behind her and her motives from both hiring her as well as her crazy actions of sounding like she has a terrible relationship with her husband, a controlling relationship over her daughter, and has a very particular way that she wants Millie, who is the main character, to care for her home. It's very interesting. Loved the thriller plot twist in it. It involves murder and torturous things that are very specific to the plot. I would read this book again. I would say the first one, and I would recommend this book if you like a thriller, contemporary, modern times thing. And I will say, I think also part of the reason that I enjoyed this book was not only that the story was well written and it kept me intrigued and wanting me to keep reading, but also I really liked the voice actress that read the book. Her name is Lauren Allman, and I just think that she did a really great job in incorporating the characters, and it really helped the experience for me. I thought it was really fun to listen to her narrate the books. The writing was very good, and I love one specific thing about Frida McFadden's writing is that she'll write what the character's thinking straight after their line. And sometimes when you're listening to an audiobook, it sounds like that's what they're replying back to the person, because I'm obviously not reading, so I'm not seeing the quotation marks. It sounds like they're replying something crazy that they would think in their mind, but then they reply what they would actually say in a civilized conversation. And I thought that that was really funny, and very interesting to see the contrast of what the character was actually thinking versus what they will actually say to the person. I do enjoy how Frida McFadden talks a lot about the injustices that occur between men and women when they are married or just in general. And I like that in the Housemaid series, the women are usually not just like a victim, which is refreshing, because usually in these situations you just read stories that feel like tragedies where the women just get hurt and they are the victims. But Frida McFadden has turned that on its head, and shown her women characters as strong and intelligent. I really like that. It's refreshing to see something like this that's different in that way. That is all for me for today. This is a very long book video, but I hope that you enjoyed it. I hope that you got some book recommendations from it. I will come back for another one once I read through another batch of books. I'm sorry if there were quite a few books on this page that I ended up not enjoying that much, but I think that in every book that I read, I get something out of them. And even if I don't enjoy necessarily the characters or everything about the story, there's always a little thing that you'll enjoy. And even if it's like something about the writing style, words used to describe things, there's always something you can take away. And I look at all the books that I read mostly through a fond lens, because I love reading. Thank you for watching, everyone, or thank you for clicking, as is my tagline. I will see you soon, and have a lovely day or night.